Did you know Medusa, the woman whose gaze could turn anyone into stone, was once just a mortal? A woman whose beauty was so radiant, even the gods themselves admired her. But one day, that very beauty became her downfall. This isn't just a story about a curse. It's about the moment when beauty, power, and fate collided. When Athena's wrath and Poseidon's desire crossed paths, and an innocent woman's life was forever rewritten. It was the moment when beauty became a curse, when a human woman became a legend, when Medusa was born, from devotion to damnation, from grace to terror, from mortal to myth. In this video, you'll discover the day Athena's anger turned a woman into a monster, the moment Medusa's curse became her strength, how fear itself turned into legend, and the quiet peace she found in solitude when the world had already forgotten her. This is not just an ancient tale, it's a reflection of our own struggle, where beauty, justice, and power often stand at war. So take a slow, deep breath, hold it for a moment, and let yourself drift back to the dark age of Greek mythology, to a world where gods played with destiny, and one woman became Medusa, a name the world still remembers as the embodiment of beautiful tragedy. Crescent Moon, if you enjoy stories like this, please consider subscribing and drop a comment below with your city and the time you're watching this. Let's see where in the world this story finds you tonight. Now close your eyes and step inside the ancient temple of Greece, where beauty turned to fear and a mortal became legend. On the rocky coasts of ancient Greece, where every mountain whispered secrets of the gods and every river carried stories older than time itself, there lived a woman whose beauty mesmerized mortals and gods alike. Her name was Medusa. The world would later know her as a Gorgon. But before that, she was mortal, pure, virtuous, and so breathtakingly beautiful that even the divine admired her. Her eyes shimmered with intelligence and depth, and her smile was a light capable of illuminating even the darkest room. Medusa's life was not just one of admiration. She was devoted, spending her days and nights in prayer within Athena's sacred temple. The white marble pillars, stretching as if to touch the sky, echoed every whispered word. Candlelight flickered softly, painting a serene glow across her gentle features, creating a sacred tranquility. One fateful afternoon, as silence embraced the temple and even the wind seemed still, Poseidon appeared, the mighty god of the sea, whose presence alone could shift the very atmosphere. Medusa sensed a presence behind her. When she looked up, there he stood, a god whose eyes held the depth of the oceans and the power of storms. Fear and awe gripped her heart. She was mortal, fragile, human, and yet here stood a deity whose desires could alter her destiny. History remembers what followed only in fragments. Some say it was chance, others whisper divine will. But one truth is clear. In that sacred hall, an innocent woman became ensnared in a web she could neither understand nor escape. Poseidon, captivated by her beauty, could not restrain himself, and Medusa, startled and overwhelmed, could do nothing. Then Athena appeared, the goddess of wisdom, the protector of the temple, and guardian of divine law. Her gaze ignited the space around her. Shadows twisted even in the candlelight. The desecration of her temple, whether intentional or not, was intolerable. Medusa realized she was no longer just a mortal woman caught in an impossible moment. She had become the target of divine wrath. Her innocence, devotion, and mortal fragility meant nothing. As the punishment began, the first change rippled through her body. Her soft, flowing hair twisted into serpents, living, hissing, writhing. Her gentle eyes began to glow with an unnatural intensity. Her face, once the epitome of beauty, hardened into something fearsome and otherworldly. The very gift that had drawn admiration, her beauty, had become the source of terror. Yet even in this transformation, traces of her humanity remained. A spark of intelligence, a flicker of inner strength, lingered in her gaze. Though cursed, she was not entirely lost. She retained her awareness, her understanding of the injustice done, and the quiet sorrow of a life stolen before it could truly flourish. The temple, once a sanctuary of prayer and reflection, now felt cold and oppressive. Shadows stretched across the marble, echoing the tragedy that had just occurred. Medusa was exiled not by choice, but by divine decree. She wandered the edges of the world, away from human eyes, yet her story was only beginning. Whispers of her existence spread across the Greek Isles. Mortals spoke of a woman cursed by the gods, whose gaze could turn men to stone. Few knew the truth, that she had once been mortal, beautiful, and innocent, that she had been a victim of forces far beyond her understanding. Her transformation became a symbol, a reminder of the delicate balance between beauty and power, innocence and fate, humanity and divine authority. Medusa was no longer merely a woman. She was legend, a cautionary tale echoing through marble halls, coastal villages, and temple ruins. Still, in the quiet moments of her exile, when winds whispered across desolate cliffs and the world seemed still, Medusa remembered who she had once been. She remembered her prayers in Athena's temple, her laughter that had once lightened the hearts of strangers, her curiosity about the world, and the fleeting moments of peace that now seemed like a distant dream. Her story is more than myth. It is a meditation on the fragility of innocence, the cruelty of divine politics, and the resilience of the human spirit, even when trapped in a web woven by forces beyond comprehension. When you imagine Medusa, standing alone on windswept cliffs, serpents writhing where her hair once flowed, take a deep breath. Feel the weight of injustice, the tragedy of beauty misused, and the quiet persistence of strength in the face of impossible odds. Even in exile, even under curse, Medusa remained unbroken. The sacred temple of Athena stretched high into the sky, its marble pillars gleaming in the soft light of countless candles. The air smelled of incense, warm and heavy, curling around every carved statue and painting in silent testimony to the devotion of those who worshipped there. Every corner seemed alive with echoes of prayers, whispers of the past, and the faint hum of a world where mortals brushed against the divine. Medusa walked quietly between the towering columns, her bare feet barely making a sound on the polished stone. Her hair, dark as the midnight sea, flowed freely down her back. Her eyes, calm and thoughtful, scanned the temple with the respect of a mortal who knew the weight of the goddess's presence. Each step she took was deliberate, each gesture a reflection of her devotion. She carried herself with grace, unaware that her life was about to change forever. From the horizon beyond the temple, the air shifted subtly, as if the very winds knew that a new presence had arrived. Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, stepped into the sacred hall. His figure was imposing, his eyes deep and stormy like the ocean itself. Even the flickering candlelight seemed to bend toward him, acknowledging a power far beyond the understanding of any mortal. Medusa sensed him immediately, a presence overwhelming and impossible to ignore, pressed into the room, vibrating through the marble floors and echoing off the walls. She turned slowly, heart racing, and met the gaze of Poseidon. His eyes held an endless depth, both compelling and terrifying. She was mortal, he was divine, and here, in the sanctuary of Athena, their worlds collided. Time seemed to stretch as Poseidon drew closer. His movements were deliberate, calculated, a predator's elegance hidden beneath a veneer of divine restraint. Medusa felt a shiver run down her spine, part fear, part anticipation. She had been admired before, by humans and even by lesser spirits of the temples, but never by a god whose very existence could shape fate itself. And then it happened. Some accounts call it an accident, others claim it was fate or divine cruelty. But in that moment, the mortal woman became ensnared in a situation far beyond her understanding. Poseidon's desire was unstoppable. Medusa, startled and unprepared, could not defend herself. She was human, fragile, caught in the force of a god whose will overshadowed her own. The stillness shattered as Athena appeared. Her presence was immediate, a force that seemed to twist the shadows and make the air crackle. The goddess of wisdom, protector of her temple, the one whose laws governed even the divine, had witnessed the disturbance. Her gaze fixed on Medusa, and in that instant, the mortal realized she was no longer merely a visitor in the sacred hall. She had become the target of divine wrath. Athena's anger was precise, unyielding, and absolute. The violation of her temple, whether intentional or not, could not be tolerated. Her words, though not heard by mortal ears, carried weight. Every fiber of the marble seemed to vibrate with her judgment. Medusa trembled. She was innocent. She had done nothing wrong. Yet her innocence was irrelevant. The laws of gods were not bound by fairness. The mortal was punished, the divine left unscathed. The transformation began. Her hair, once soft and flowing, dark as the night sky, began to writhe. Twisting shapes emerged, living serpents curling and hissing as if breathing the air of life. Her eyes, previously calm and intelligent, flared with unnatural fire. Her face, once the very definition of beauty, hardened into a mask of fear and power. The gift that had drawn admiration, the very essence of her mortal charm, became the source of terror. Yet even in this transformation, a spark of humanity lingered. Her intelligence, her awareness, her sorrow all remained. Though cursed, she was not entirely lost. She understood the injustice done to her and mourned the life that had been stolen before it could flourish. The temple, once a sanctuary of prayer and peace, felt cold, oppressive. Shadows stretched unnaturally, as if echoing the tragedy. Medusa was exiled, not by choice, but by decree. She wandered to the edges of the known world, shunned by humans, yet her story was only beginning. Whispers spread across the Greek islands. Mortals spoke of a woman cursed by the gods, whose gaze could turn any man into stone. Few knew the truth, that she had once been mortal, beautiful, and innocent, that she had been a victim of forces far beyond her comprehension. Her story became a symbol, a reminder of the delicate balance between beauty and power, innocence and fate, mortality and divinity. Medusa was no longer merely a woman. She was legend, her tale echoing through marble halls, coastal villages, and ruined temples. Still, in moments of solitude on windswept cliffs, she remembered who she had once been. She remembered her prayers in Athena's temple, her laughter that had once brightened strangers' hearts, her curiosity about the world, and fleeting moments of peace that now seemed like distant dreams. Her story is more than myth. It is a meditation on the fragility of innocence, the cruelty of divine politics, and the resilience of the human spirit, even when trapped in a web woven by forces beyond comprehension. When you imagine Medusa standing alone, serpents writhing where her hair once flowed, take a slow breath. Feel the weight of injustice, the tragedy of beauty misused, and the quiet persistence of strength in the face of impossible odds. Even in exile, even cursed, she remained unbroken. After the fateful encounter in Athena's temple, Medusa's life had irrevocably changed. The mortal woman who had once walked with grace and innocence now bore the weight of divine punishment. Her hair, once soft and flowing, had transformed into a writhing mass of serpents, alive and hissing, each movement echoing her curse. Her eyes, glowing unnaturally, could turn any who met her gaze into stone. Exiled from the world of mortals, Medusa wandered across desolate cliffs and barren landscapes, a figure both feared and mourned. She carried with her the memory of her humanity, the life she had lost, the prayers she had whispered in Athena's temple, and the laughter that once brightened her days. Yet even in exile, she was beginning to understand the power now contained within her. At first, Medusa recoiled from her reflection, horrified by the transformation. She remembered her own face, once the definition of beauty, and now replaced by features that inspired terror. The serpents on her head writhed constantly, hissing and slithering with a life of their own. She tried to close her eyes, to shield herself from the world, but the very act seemed impossible. Her power could not be contained, not even from herself. Days turned into nights as she wandered the cliffs, the wind whipping through the serpents atop her head. She realized that each movement, each glance, carried consequences far beyond her understanding. When anger, fear, or desperation flared within her, her gaze could petrify anyone unfortunate enough to meet it. The humans who once admired her beauty now only whispered tales of horror and power. Yet Medusa's story was not one solely of despair. With time, she began to explore the limits of her new form. She tested her powers, learning how a glance could halt the strongest warrior in his tracks. She discovered the snakes were not merely instruments of terror but extensions of her own consciousness, guardians that could sense danger and react faster than any human reflex. The transformation had given her something that no mortal could possess: invulnerability. She could no longer be harmed by conventional means, her strength and presence commanding respect and fear alike. And yet, with every step into her newfound power, she also felt the loneliness that came with being apart from the world she had once known. The isolation was profound, a reminder that power often carries its own punishment. Legends of Medusa began to spread across the Greek Isles. Travelers and merchants spoke of a woman cursed by the gods, whose gaze could freeze men in their tracks. Some whispered that she had once been mortal and beautiful, a victim of divine politics and cruel fate. Few dared approach the lands where she dwelled, and even fewer returned to speak of it. As the days passed, Medusa's understanding of her powers deepened. She learned to control the gaze, to direct her fear and anger into precise action, rather than letting it lash out uncontrollably. She discovered that her serpents could act as sentinels, alerting her to anyone who approached. In solitude, she trained herself, refining every instinct, every reaction, until she became a master of the abilities bestowed upon her. But with power came introspection. Medusa realized that her punishment was not just about transformation or fear. It was a lesson in survival, resilience, and understanding the consequences of forces greater than oneself. Athena's wrath had made her a monster in the eyes of the world, but it had also made her formidable, a symbol of the delicate boundary between divine justice and mortal suffering. The cliffs where she lived became her domain, a place where she could observe the world without being touched by it. She watched ships sail the Aegean, villagers tending fields, and soldiers marching along the coasts. Each encounter reminded her of the life she had once known and the world that now regarded her as myth, legend, and fear all at once. Yet, even as she honed her powers, there were moments of reflection. In the quiet of the night, when the wind was still and the stars shimmered above, she remembered her laughter, her friendships, and the simple joys of mortal life. Those memories brought both sorrow and strength. They reminded her of what it meant to be human, and why the balance between mortal vulnerability and divine power was so fragile. The transformation also taught her patience and strategy. Medusa learned to anticipate threats before they arrived, to move silently and strike only when necessary. The serpents atop her head, once chaotic and unpredictable, became extensions of her mind, each one capable of independent thought yet perfectly synchronized with her will. She was no longer simply reacting to the world. She was mastering it. Travelers who accidentally entered her domain experienced the full weight of her transformation. Warriors froze mid-step at the glance of her glowing eyes, their weapons falling from numb hands. Merchants turned pale and fled, whispering tales of the monster atop the cliffs. Even the bravest heroes began to fear approaching a figure that combined beauty, tragedy, and lethal power in a way that no mortal could comprehend. Despite the terror she inspired, Medusa retained her intelligence and clarity. She was not a mindless monster. She understood the consequences of her actions and the fragile balance between self-defense and revenge. Her power was immense, but it was tempered by thought, reflection, and a lingering sense of the humanity she had lost. Through this journey, Medusa's legend grew. She was no longer the mortal woman who had walked the temples of Athena. She was a Gorgon, a living symbol of the intersection between divine punishment and human resilience. Every story told of her carried awe, fear, and a reminder that beauty, when twisted by power, could become both a weapon and a curse. And yet, in solitude, she found purpose. Medusa discovered that her power, while a punishment, could also be a shield. She became a guardian of the remote cliffs, a force no mortal could challenge. Her presence alone was enough to deter those who sought to exploit or harm the lands she had come to call home. In these moments, she reflected on the injustice she had endured. The encounter with Poseidon, the wrath of Athena, both were events beyond her control. And yet, they had shaped her into someone stronger, someone who could face the world not as a powerless mortal, but as a being whose very gaze commanded life and death. Her story was no longer one of vulnerability. It was a testament to endurance, intelligence, and the delicate balance between fear and respect. Medusa had transformed not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. She had embraced the full scope of her powers, understanding that true strength was as much about control as it was about raw ability. In the quiet moments of dawn, when the first light touched the cliffs, she would stand and gaze over the Aegean, the serpents on her head shimmering with the sun. She was both monster and human, cursed yet powerful, feared yet wise. She was Medusa, the Gorgon, a legend born of tragedy and forged in resilience. Even as centuries passed, and tales of heroes and gods continued across the Greek Isles, her story remained unique. It reminded all who heard it of the consequences of divine conflict, the endurance of the human spirit, and the terrifying yet beautiful potential that could emerge from suffering. And in the solitude of her domain, Medusa would close her eyes, feel the cool wind against her scaled serpents, and remember the mortal she had once been. A woman of beauty, curiosity, and quiet devotion. That memory anchored her, even as she wielded the power that could turn flesh to stone and command fear in every living being. For Medusa, the Gorgon, the journey had begun with punishment, but it evolved into mastery. A transformation meant to terrify became a force of strength, reflection, and unyielding presence. A testament that even in the hands of the gods, a mortal could rise beyond expectation. Long after Medusa had mastered her powers and claimed the remote cliffs as her own, tales of her legend began to travel across the Greek Isles. Stories spoke of a mortal turned monster, a woman cursed by the gods, whose gaze could turn even the bravest warrior to stone. Yet, with legend came the inevitable, the arrival of a hero. Perseus, the son of Danae and Zeus, carried with him a destiny that would lead him to her domain. His journey was marked by courage, divine guidance, and an understanding that his quest would test the limits of mortal ingenuity. He did not seek Medusa for personal glory alone, but to fulfill a mission that intertwined fate, gods, and men in ways few could comprehend. As Perseus approached the cliffs, he felt the weight of history pressing down upon him. The wind howled through jagged rocks, carrying whispers of the Gorgon's wrath. Each step was deliberate, every sense heightened. He was aware that one glance from Medusa could end his life instantly. His preparation was meticulous. a polished shield gifted by Athena, a reflective surface to avoid direct eye contact, and the wisdom imparted by the gods themselves. Above him, on the windswept cliffs, Medusa watched. She had sensed his approach long before he came into view, the subtle tremor in the air signaling the presence of another mortal daring to trespass into her domain. The serpents on her head shifted, hissing softly, sensing the tension and intent of the approaching figure. She did not move immediately. Patience had been her teacher, and experience her guide. Perseus paused, studying the terrain. The sun was low, casting elongated shadows across the jagged cliffs. He understood that the timing of his movements would determine success or death. He inched forward, careful not to attract unnecessary attention. Each calculated step brought him closer to the legendary figure, closer to a confrontation that had been whispered about in myths for generations. Medusa, fully aware of the mortal below, began to descend slightly from the cliff edge, her eyes glowing faintly. She was no longer the frightened mortal who had once prayed in Athena's temple. She was the Gorgon, the embodiment of both human and divine punishment, and every step she took carried the weight of centuries of fear and reverence. Perseus raised the polished shield, catching the sunlight and reflecting it toward Medusa without making direct eye contact. This was not just a tool but a lifeline, a way to navigate the peril of her gaze. Every movement required precision, every breath a measure of patience. He understood that this was not a mere battle of strength, but one of wit, courage, and careful calculation. Medusa's serpents writhed as she sensed his determination. She did not attack immediately. The Gorgon had learned the value of observation. Each flick of a snake's tongue measured his intent, his resolve, and his fear. Despite her immense power, she understood the precarious balance between action and restraint. This mortal was clever, bold, and, most importantly, cautious. He might survive longer than most had. Time seemed to stretch as they faced one another, the wind carrying the tension like a tangible force. Perseus inched closer, using the reflective surface to navigate the danger of her gaze. Medusa remained poised, a figure of both terror and tragic elegance, her serpentine hair coiling and uncoiling, her presence commanding the very landscape. And then the moment arrived. Perseus struck with precision, guided by strategy and divine insight. The shield reflected Medusa's image just long enough for him to act without risking his life. Each movement was swift, deliberate, and final. Medusa, despite her unparalleled power, could not predict the exact timing of his attack. As the confrontation reached its climax, a profound stillness fell over the cliffs. The collision of mortal ingenuity and divine punishment became a tableau of fate itself. Medusa, the immortalized symbol of fear and tragedy, faced a moment that neither she nor the mortal could fully control. With a single decisive action, Perseus severed Medusa's head. The act was precise, a combination of skill, strategy, and divine guidance. The moment was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. A mortal standing against a being shaped by gods, altering the course of myth with a single blow. Yet even in death, Medusa's power lingered. From her severed head, the gaze remained potent, a final testament to the tragic blend of beauty, injustice, and supernatural might. Perseus carefully secured the head, understanding that even now it was a weapon and a symbol of divine retribution. The cliffs grew silent, the wind shifting as if mourning the end of an era. Medusa, though no longer alive in the mortal sense, left an indelible mark upon the world. Her story would continue to echo through the Greek Isles, carried by those who witnessed, heard, or imagined the tragic figure who had once been a mortal woman of unparalleled beauty. In the aftermath, Perseus returned with the head, a symbol of both triumph and caution. The myth of Medusa became a story not only of fear but of the complexities of divine power, mortality, and human courage. Heroes and gods alike would remember that within every act of violence, injustice, or divine intervention, there existed layers of tragedy, resilience, and reflection. Medusa's legacy endured. Even as statues, stories, and paintings immortalized her as a monster, those who looked closely could see the human she had once been. A reminder of innocence lost, of beauty turned to legend, and of a life entwined with forces far beyond comprehension. She was a paradox, simultaneously victim and powerful, human and supernatural, tragic and awe-inspiring. Her story taught lessons not only about fear but about the strength of spirit, the consequences of divine interference, and the thin line between mortality and legend. Perseus, though victorious, carried the weight of what had occurred. The encounter was not merely about defeating a monster. It was about confronting the consequences of God's whims, navigating fear and power, and understanding that even heroes are bound by forces beyond their control. And in the silent aftermath, standing over the cliffs where wind met stone and sky met sea, one could almost feel Medusa's lingering presence. A reminder that courage, fear, beauty, and tragedy are eternally intertwined, and that legends are born not only from heroism but from the resilience of those who suffer and endure. Even centuries later, the story of Medusa and Perseus continues to captivate, reminding the world that behind every myth lies a human heart, or once human, in Medusa's case, struggling with fate, power, and the eternal consequences of divine conflict. The hero's journey, the confrontation, and the aftermath became immortalized in Greek mythology. Yet, Medusa's essence, her sorrow, her strength, her intellect, remained a haunting presence, a reflection of the complexity of human and divine interaction. She was not merely a monster to be defeated. She was a cautionary tale, a force of nature, and an enduring symbol of beauty transformed into power. As the sun set over the cliffs, casting long shadows across jagged stones, the story settled into legend. Medusa, the Gorgon, and Perseus, the mortal hero, became part of the same mythic tapestry. Their encounter was no longer just an event but a lesson. That power, justice, and fate often collide in ways incomprehensible, and that those who survive, whether human or divine, are forever changed. The cliffs grew quiet, the sea whispered, and the wind carried tales of Medusa's gaze, Perseus' courage, and the eternal struggle between mortals and gods. And though centuries would pass and generations would tell and retell the story, one truth remained. The mortal and the divine, the hero and the cursed, were forever entwined in a narrative of tragedy, power, and the inexorable passage of fate.